the most compassionate, the entirely merciful. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Peace, blessings, and mercy of Allah be upon you all, dear viewers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Hello and welcome to this week's Open Dialogue. Today we have chosen a topic related to this time of the year. It's the holiday season, the season of festivities, and we are coming up to the new year 2023. People around this time will be struggling to attend parties. People who are working would be under peer pressure to attend Christmas parties. And there will be a lot of intoxication at those parties, and people will be struggling to stay sober. We have chosen the topic of intoxication today. To dissect this topic in detail and to understand it in all its depth, we are joined by two expert guests to discuss the topic. We have with us Hujjatul Islam wal Muslimin, Syed Mohammad Radawi. Syed Mohammad Radawi is the head of the Religious Advisory Board at the Shia Islamic Education Society in London, where he answers inquiries and resolves family disputes on a daily basis according to the Islamic law. Assalamu alaikum, Syed.
Wa alaikum assalam, Sister Zainab and Brother Zabair. Thank you for being there and taking part in this program, and inshallah it is
Thank you.
going to be beneficial.
Thank you so much for giving us your time from your busy schedule. We are also joined by Brother Zabair Hussain. Brother Zabair Hussain is a qualified and trained cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. He has a BSc and an MSc in psychology and has got extensive training and extensive work experience in this field as a cognitive behavioral therapist. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Zabair. Thank you for joining us today.
Walaikum salam, Sister Zainab. Thank you very much for inviting me this evening.
Now, before we start the topic and before we discuss intoxication and all its different aspects, I noticed that you are working with the BAME community. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the BAME community and also your work as a mentor for the asylum seekers? That sounded very interesting.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess first of all, my work with the BAME community really started from the interest around the taboo and stigma when the BAME community is faced with mental health problems. Because essentially we see many non-BAME patients coming through the system receiving therapy and treatment, and unfortunately we do not see people from more diverse communities and backgrounds. And a lot of that reason is due to taboo and stigma. And in particularly my more recent work with supporting people who are coming as asylum seekers or younger people as unaccompanied asylum seekers, they're in a very vulnerable position. And due to that transition and due to the trauma they may have faced in their own country, they're more vulnerable to negative experiences in this country as well. Of course, physically and mentally, they're vulnerable. And this is why we've started to focus more on them and support them more as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now let's start today's topic, and it is intoxication. So, Brother Zabair, I'll start with you. If you could please give us a definition. What do we mean by intoxication? And, what are the different things that we should be thinking about when we are talking about intoxication?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you, I guess, for bringing this topic on the platform, because there's so much taboo and stigma in the community with regards to this. Because, of course, and I'm sure Maulana will elaborate on this further, in Islam, it's a very sensitive topic. And this is why many people shy away from talking about this so openly. But I guess intoxication, the definition, it's referring to any substance which a person may take excessively, which will alter their physical and mental state, and it will alter and impair the physical and mental control they have over their bodies as well. So when we talk about intoxication, of course, the main form of intoxication we see often and hear about is alcohol, how that impairs your mood, how that impairs the way you respond around you. But also there's other forms of intoxications, such as illicit drugs, such as cannabis, which is very common, unfortunately, among young people, cocaine, and more recently, like it's been shown in the media as well, there's other substances available which many people have become dependent on and take on a regular basis, such as spice as well. And this has become very problematic, I guess, for people like me who work in the mental health field, because often the mental health problems may come after the dependency of intoxication, or it may come before the mental health as well. So it's very interconnected, it's very closely connected as well. And of course, it's very problematic when we think about it within the Muslim community. And unfortunately, the reality is Muslims do drink. They do take alcohol, they do take other illicit substances as well. Of course, we know the laws around this and the implications of this, but unfortunately, it's a reality which we're faced with. And over a gradual period of time, it has a significant impact on that person's physical health and mental health as well.
Wow. But Syed, I'd like to bring you here with your daily work. Do you find I will come back to the point that Brother Zabair just raised about Muslims drinking and Muslims indulging in substance abuse. But first of all, I'd like you also to give a definition of intoxication as per Islamic view.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Uh, the verses of Holy Quran refer, it doesn't refer to wine or beer or anything else. It addresses the issue as intoxication. So, so this clearly gives the message that intoxication is that which is not liked. Uh, for example, the verse of Holy Quran where Allah Subhanahu wa Taala discusses intoxication, He also mentions that there are benefits, but the harms are far greater than the benefits. And the reason why the harm is far greater than benefit is intoxication. So, intoxication is the center point of forbidding alcohol. And
Sorry, Syed.
then there is,
Sorry to interrupt you, Syed. Sorry. You referred there to the ayah that talks about alcohol, if I am not mistaken, right? Where Allah
yeah,
subhanahu wa ta'ala says
yeah,
that there are benefits on alcohol, but the harms far
yeah,
exceed. Okay.
yes,
And
yes.
you're saying it is because of the intoxicating element in.
Intoxication, yeah, yeah.
Sure. Sorry. Carry
إنما
on.
الخمر والميسر.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly refers to this point. And if you look at the narrations, also we find that the uh, drinking of alcohol is considered, or intoxicating yourself is considered as the mother of all sins. There are examples given in riwayat and hadith that if you can make a person drink alcohol, he will be able to commit any kind of crime. But if a person is not drunk, he will think twice before he commits a crime.
Yeah.
So this is one of the ways of uh, controlling even some of the major uh, revolutions or major problems in our society that has happened in the history. Uh, these intoxications were used to corrupt the whole nation or destroy the whole nation. So, like for example, China, although they have not banned alcohol there, but their nation was drugged and made addictive to drugs, and then the government had to take very harsh measures to get rid of it. So even Islam, when Allah Subhanahu wa Taala brought Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, although we believe that intoxicating yourself or alcohol was forbidden in all divine faiths, but the approach that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala adopted in Quran and in Islam was gradual, And there is a reason behind it, and the reason is that the society was so corrupt and so much indulged into alcohol and business. It had grown as a kind of major business, and this is what we see in the Western society. The alcohol industry is very uh, well established in the society, and they can control even the parliaments and decision making, and even tax, how the alcohol products could be taxed, and this and that. So uh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduced Islam. Then gradually the ruling came that from today onwards alcohol is forbidden. And when the ruling came, the places of consuming alcohol were targeted and closed and shut down, and the barrels of alcohol were punctured, and it was thrown away. And then it became forbidden
Mhm.
totally. And then Islam introduced harsh punishment for intoxicating yourself, and there are rules and regulations. Even if you grow grapes uh, for the sake of giving it to someone to make alcohol and sell it, even that growing of grapes in your
Mhm.
farm becomes forbidden. So gradually these harsh measures were introduced so people don't go in this direction.
Sure. Brother Zabair, what are the other things that can make people display addictive behaviors and become by a substance and suffer impairment? And also, what are the symptoms that people who are under the influence of substances can display?
Sure, that's a really good question. I think first of all, just going back to Maulana's points over there, that yes, I think there's clear logic as to why Islam made the ruling around alcohol, because when you are under the influence and intoxicated, of course, one loses their senses, so they're unable to react in a very rational and logical self. And some of the symptoms, of course, with alcohol dependency or any other form of intoxication is forgetfulness, is of course not being able to act appropriately and losing one's inhibitions, which may consequently bring on any many other issues, such as committing a sin or doing something out of character or something which is not appropriate, of course. So I can see the Islamic logic, of course, for one's own protection and the protection around your family and the community, why alcohol is forbidden, or any other form of intoxication or mood altering substance in Islam is forbidden. I guess when thinking about the reasons why people may become intoxicated or then develop some form of dependency, we have to be very careful here that we cannot paint everyone with the same brushstroke, because everyone has very personal and different reasons as to why they may turn to alcohol. And this is where I guess as psychotherapists, we approach the matter with great sense of compassion to develop some sort of understanding why this person may have turned to some form of intoxication, even though they knew it's completely forbidden, even though their family may have been completely against it. Why did they still turn to alcohol? And there's many reasons for this. There's of course environmental, there's psychological and genetic reasons as well. But I'll briefly talk about some of the psychological reasons why somebody may turn to alcohol. So there's a lot of research out there which suggests when people are under undue stress and acute stress and are unable to cope with such life pressures and life difficulties, they turn to alcohol for some sort of coping mechanism or some sort of release, because it temporarily they are able to lose their senses, forget about all their worldly problems, and they're in that state of intoxication, which provides some sort of temporary relief. Of course, in the short term, they may benefit from that, but in the long term, it becomes problematic. And we see many patients, unfortunately, clients who have gone through some sort of grief or bereavement, may have lost someone very close around them, and they have no support networks or they have no healthy coping mechanisms. They may turn to alcohol to relieve some of those symptoms and some of that distress they're experiencing. And then, of course, I see patients who may suffer from anxiety, and they often tell me that I drink because it helps reduce the anxiety. And of course, alcohol will do that because it inhibits some of our emotions and feelings. But ultimately, alcohol is a depressant. So what happens in the long run, that your depressive symptoms will keep on increasing, because ultimately it's a depressant substance which increases your depression. And then, of course, we need to think about family background and family influences as well. Unfortunately, having worked in the community, I see many families where it's become secretly normalized, where the dad may have drunk and therefore now the son drinks as well. And it's almost this secret, covert, accepted coping mechanism and coping behavior. And of course, as children, we turn to our parents as role models, and we may pick up these learned behaviors when we see how other people are coping around us, and we adapt that approach as well. And I think Maulana made an excellent point that alcohol is one of the biggest psychoactive substances available at the moment. But you can see society has done so much to change maybe the packaging of cigarettes, control the prices, increase the prices of cigarettes and other substances. It's still illegal to smoke cannabis. However, alcohol is still very widely available and it's cheap. And this is why, of course, many people may drink as well.
Sure. Syed, what do you say to what Brother Zabair said? Because you deal with cases every single day. What do you see in terms of family disputes that come to you, and how is alcohol playing a role in family difficulties, family problems that come to you? And also, Islam is quite very strict regarding alcohol, where we are even told not to sit at the same table where there is alcohol present. I suppose that's as a preventative measure. But as Brother Zubair said, because of the society we live in and it's widely available, it's kind of hard to avoid. And there are many people who are under the influence of alcohol or have drinking issues in our communities even, but it's all under it's hidden and under behind closed doors.
Yes, I mean, again, if we look at the verse of Holy Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how He discusses alcohol, uh, explains everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Rijsun min amali shaitan fajtanibuhu la'allakum tuflihun. Rijs, I mean, in a simple English language, we can translate it into filth. That uh, intoxicating yourself or drinking alcohol is rich. It's a filthy action, and the action is also described as the action of shaitan. And then rarely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use ijtanibu. Ijtanibu, the word ijtanibu means you should keep yourself away from it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering us to keep ourselves away from alcohol, which is act of shaitan, and the act is filthy, and we are supposed to keep away from it. So this one verse describes everything. And um, there are narrations, for example, from Imam Raza alayhi salatu wasalam, which say that ما بعث الله نبيا قط إلا بتحريم الخمر. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not appoint a messenger unless he told them to declare alcohol as forbidden act, drinking of alcohol as a forbidden act. And there is another hadith from Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, in which he says, ما بعث الله نبيا قط إلا وفي علم الله أنه إذا أكمل له دينه كان فيه تحريم الخمر ولم يزل الخمر حراما. That he goes further, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, and says and explains that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made sure that each prophet that was appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in completing their mission should include forbiddance of alcohol in their teachings. Otherwise their mission would not have been completed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made sure, according to Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, that this order is continued and practiced. Unfortunately, when we look at the Christianity, and we find that the alcohol has become part of church, which I would say that it's due to the corrupt leadership in the churches that this has happened. While I was in America, I used to have long drives, and I would listen to Christian church radios on while I was driving. And once I was going through Mississippi, and these southern states are very Christian states. So a lady called the radio channel and said that, according to her research, the word wine in Old English was only used for grape juice, but the corrupt leaders of the church replaced it with the intoxicating liquid, and therefore we should avoid. She was insisting that we should avoid consuming alcohol, we should avoid eating pork, and mentioning a lot about this. So the point is that uh, alcohol was forbidden in all religions, and by the time Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came, the Arab society was so corrupted and misguided that they had also brought alcohol into their daily life uh, as an unavoidable thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduced the law gradually, although some people nowadays say that if you bring an Islamic government anywhere, you should follow the orders of the order that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala implemented at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was at the beginning of Islam, when Islam was not introduced. Now Islam has been introduced as a complete code of life, so there is no excuse to allow for any Muslim countries to allow alcohol. And recently we watched the football, and alcohol was banned inside the stadium, although they could have banned outside as well. But the statistics show, if the same game had taken place, I mean, so same uh, football championship was taken place elsewhere, there would have been so many crimes and problems in the society, and they had much less crime in their society. So, from every point of view, consuming alcohol is harmful for not only the person who is drinking, but also the harms extend to other persons as well.
Very interesting point. So, following from these points that the Syed made, Brother Zabair, if you can expand a little bit more on the harms that the Syed just talked about towards the end here, what are the effects that consuming alcohol or taking drugs has on the individuals themselves, health wise, and on their families also? You mentioned mental health issues. But if you can just elaborate a bit more and open this area up on the effects of the substance abuse on the individuals and their families.
Sure, no problem. Inshallah, I'll talk about the effects and the impact it has on the wider people and the wider network. Just wanted to touch on Maulana's point. I think, as Maulana beautifully mentioned, that of course in the Quran it's very explicit. It's referring to alcohol as filth. So there's no doubt about it being good or bad. It's something bad and harmful for you. And as the Imams have mentioned as well, that of course it's strictly forbidden. However, what I find really interesting is that even in Islamic countries, how alcohol has been romanticized as maybe something quite pleasant and something which can help you achieve a higher state of consciousness. And before I came onto this program, and I was thinking about this and also thinking about my patients from Muslim communities, and something came to mind. There's things from other schools of thought. There's a very famous poet, I'm sure you've heard of him, Jalaluddin Rumi. And of course, I don't want to make this a bit of a battle between different schools of thoughts, but he's very much romanticized alcohol, and I know he's very much using it as an analogy in his couplets and poems. But I think it's really, you need to be really careful when you start thinking of something quite negative in a very positive stance, and we need to be really careful how alcohol is being described to maybe the younger generations and older generations as well, and how it's romanticized so heavily as well. And I think this is what brings me on to the impact of alcohol. Of course, there's the mental health impact. We know this, that people unfortunately can develop depression, anxiety, many other disorders as well. And then, of course, they can go on to become clinically dependent, where they simply, their body, the tolerance has increased to such a level where they have to heavily rely on alcohol. And this is where it becomes problematic, because if the individual tries withdrawing from the alcohol, they will suffer from serious withdrawal symptoms, which can lead to hospitalization as well. So physically, your body is being destroyed. We know that it impacts all major organs. It can lead to cardiovascular issues. It can lead to liver failure as well, vitamin deficiency as well in the long run. And for women who suffer from alcohol dependency, it can affect an unborn child, and you have alcohol fetal syndrome as well. So in terms of psychological and physical impact, in some cases it can be irreversible. And this is why, from a health perspective as well, it's really encouraged, obviously, to avoid alcohol altogether. And then in terms of impact on the wider kind of network and wider family as well, we need to be careful that we don't link alcohol always to crime. Of course, there's statistics which do suggest that, but it's not a causal factor. However, it does have a massive impact in terms of children in the home, because people are acting in a way they may not normally act. So unfortunately, they're more prone to violent behavior, more abusive behavior as well. Your relationships will be heavily impacted around you, your relationships with your parents, your relationship with your partners or your spouse as well, that becomes heavily impacted as well. And of course, your relationship at work. If you become alcohol dependent or dependent on any other substance, you are then investing financially so heavily in the substances. And therefore, I see many families who fall into masses of debt. And of course, we know financial problems cause such a heavy pressure and heavy stress on the entire family, not just that individual as well. And therefore, it's not just the physical and mental health impact that alcohol has, it has wider impact. Even holding down a job becomes incredibly problematic. And therefore, it's a very holistic impact and impacts all areas of an individual's life.
Wow. Syed, you explained why we shouldn't go into intoxication and why we should resist substance abuse based on the scriptures and the severity of what's been described in the Quran and in the narrations. But what are the alternatives? Because at the end of the day, as Brother Zabair explained, that individuals who go down the route of alcoholism or substance abuse use it as a coping mechanism to get away from pressures of life. What are the alternatives that these people can use in order to cope with the pressures of life and not go towards substance abuse?
Yeah. I did not answer the previous question that you mentioned about the family and its effect on the families. Yes, majority of the cases that I receive, especially in this Western society, well, it's obvious that I deal with Muslim cases, and quite a lot of the divorces that are taking place in our society, whether in practicing or non-practicing families, is due to consumption of drugs and alcohol. And drug can damage the whole family unit, and it affects the body of the person who is consuming alcohol. And also, uh, I had heard of cases where even it affects the intimacy, and that becomes the reason of divorce. If the person is not violent, but because of consuming drugs and alcohol, he has lost the ability of having an intimate relationship properly, and that causes frustration for the partner of the person. And and in the long term also, if the wife becomes pregnant while the husband is intoxicated with alcohol, so the side effects are passed on to the child as well. And if the mother is also alcoholic, then the damages are far greater than the father's consumption of alcohol. Of course, if the father of the family is drinking alcohol and coming home, he loses control. I had cases of in Muslim families, incest taking place due to consumption of alcohol, because the person has totally lost the idea whether this uh, person is related to him, or child or sister-in-law or someone else, and they don't care. When they drink alcohol, they totally become uh, blind, and it leads into the breaking of families. And of course, when we look at the verses of Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises intoxication in the paradise. So he is saying, don't be attracted to this temporary intoxication that exists in this world. You need to control and behave and be patient, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give you better intoxication in the world hereafter. And so that itself shows that seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very much better intoxication, which can lead and sort your life out. If you become addicted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although addiction in any form is not good, but it can be used as moving yourself away from the wrong kind of addiction, and bringing the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life, and obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life, and being hopeful for the benefits in the world hereafter.
Sure. Brother Zabair, when you get patients, I presume families are the ones who get in touch with you when their loved ones are affected by intoxication and alcoholism. What do you find, and how do you help those families then, and those individuals with their long-term health impact that this has, and psychological effects that alcoholism and substance abuse has on the individuals and their families? How do you help them? Because you
Sure.
said earlier that you deal with these patients with great compassion, and you try to look at the factors that are actually pushing them towards this. So how do you start helping such patients?
Of course, that's a really good question, and you are correct. It's usually the family who will approach some sort of health professional, mental health professional, and this can work two ways. Unfortunately, the individual may be so heavily dependent that they themselves no longer want treatment. And this becomes very problematic, because we cannot force treatment upon somebody. We need them to be willing, we need them to be engaged, and we need them to have some level of understanding what is happening with them. And there are some cases, not many, but there are some cases where unfortunately the family may be absolutely stressed, they may be completely worried, they might be at their wit's ends. They ring in the GP, they ring in the doctors, they ring in every mental health professional. But unfortunately, if the individual themselves does not engage or is not motivated to make these health changes or lifestyle changes, it's very problematic. In those cases where the individual is willing to engage, of course, there's so much help out there. There's the therapeutic interventions which we offer to help the individual understand, first of all, why they turned to the alcohol, what was troubling them, what was the most challenging aspect for them in their life that resulted in them drinking. And often what I see and often what I find is where people have an inability to tolerate certain negative and difficult emotions. And I guess this is something we need to think about as a society as well. We're living in a very strange world at the moment where it's all about quick fixes. And we're living in a world where I need to feel good. I need to be in a constant state of positivity. and we're not living in a world where there's high levels of resilience, and tolerance to negative experiences and negative emotions. So often what happens, a person might be struggling with some very difficult emotions. The tolerance is not there, the resilience is not there, and therefore they may turn to some sort of substance to give them that instant quick fix to make them feel better. But it's temporary, of course, and we know that as well. However, where individuals kind of recognize that actually, if I carry on like this in the next 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, what impact it will have on myself and the wider family around them as well, it then starts to motivate them to make those changes as well. And often it's quite a strange phenomenon where people may have just this light bulb moment that I want to turn back to my deen, I want to come back to my religion, I want to correct my path, and I want to correct my way. And the faith itself becomes motivation for them to engage in treatment. Obviously, depending on how dependent they are, there are detox processes which the individual can go through, and they're supported with that by health professionals. And of course, there's the psychological process as well, where we look at healthier coping mechanisms, better ways to cope. And, so we take it for granted that people somehow should know what is right and wrong, should know what is a good way and a bad way to cope. Due to difficult upbringings and chaotic upbringings, people may have not developed that moral compass. So they may not even have that moral compass which guides them into what is wrong, what is bad, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. And therefore, this is the process of therapy where we develop some understanding, some framework, and an individual's personality is developed as well. And, ironically, I think this is just touching again on Maulana's point as well, that how Islamic countries should consider and deal with alcohol. But the irony is, even in Islamic countries, when I visit Pakistan, alcohol is readily available. It's almost become connected with the status quo, that if you belong to a certain status or a certain social group, it's seen as a positive, classy thing to drink as well. And therefore, again, it's being framed in a very positive way. And psychologically, younger people can be influenced by this and obviously follow that path then as well. I was in Iran in 2016, and again, I saw alcohol there as well, very covertly, but it's available. And I guess this is just some sort of insights into it's available everywhere, and it's how you respond to those situations and manage those situations which will help. And I think in the Western world, they're trying to introduce some preventative measures now, but still they've got a very long way to go. When I see younger people come for therapy who may have developed alcohol dependency, often very young people, 18, 19, it's their first time in university, they have this newfound freedom, it's freshers week at university, all the drinks are £1, and they want to have the time of their life. And again, people are living very much in the here and now. They're not focusing on the consequences and not focusing on the here and after as well.
Thank you, Brother Zabair. We are approaching the end of the program shortly. But Syed, following from the point that Brother Zabair made, how can we increase resilience in the face of these challenges and in the face of the readily available alcohol and readily available substances? How can we increase our resilience? And how can family educate their children to be more resilient in the face of these challenges?
Well,
And communities.
this is the best time to be resilient. I mean, especially when Christmas parties are going on in colleges, schools, and workplaces, and quite often we receive these questions that, Maulana, what should we do? We are invited for these parties. If we don't go to these parties, we will be not considered as socializing people. And there are places where the resistance of Muslims has worked, because there are people who are vegetarian, vegans, and others. So, and they have some other allergies. So, in a civilized society, it is more and more becoming acceptable to accommodate people with different ideas. I personally, when I used to go to college here, had this problem, and I have personally attended politicians' meetings and gatherings. For example, I remember a few years ago, I was invited with one of my colleagues to take part in European Parliament, and we went there, and they asked everything to us. What are your diets, and what restrictions you have, and everything. And we explained, and we were told not to be shy and express everything what we want. So Muslims should not be apologetic. Muslims should explain what is right and what is wrong for them. And when we went to these meetings, for example, the time was so short. One of the meetings actually took place while we were having our lunch. So the mics were in front of every person sitting around the table having their lunch, and discussion was going on, and we were having lunch, and there were people on the same table who were also drinking alcohol. So we had requested, please place us in a separate area where the persons around us are not drinking, and they had taken care of that, and they had placed the people who were not drinking alcohol next to us. And the best example that I personally witnessed was the Jews. I mean, Jews had ordered their own kosher meat and and food, kosher food, and their food had come with totally sealed packs, and they opened the seal and ate the food in front of us. And we had, of course, our restrictions, and those restrictions were followed and adopted. So we should not be apologetic. We should give confidence to our children. And if the leader of the family is apologetic and he is reluctant in accepting and giving gifts of champagne bottles, he or she is teaching the lesson to the children. So the children will go a step further and do something more harmful for themselves. And I've seen the examples that the family, which at the time of Christmas become relaxed, their children have gone beyond the limit they had established.
That's a very good point you made, Sayed, and also the fact that, if you stand up for what you believe, then you will find that managements of companies do tend to respect your boundaries and respect your requirements. It's just a matter of being unapologetic and confident in oneself. But Brother Zabair, following from this point also, why are some people with difficult backgrounds, as you said, who have experienced trauma or difficult childhood or difficult circumstances, some are still better at resisting and do not go down this path, which is self destructive, and others are unable to and go down this path and of substance abuse and alcoholism and destroy their mental well-being and physical health? Why is this the case? Why are some people better at resisting and some are not, with same backgrounds?
Sure, that's a really interesting question, and there's been many studies around this, and none of it's ever conclusive. And there's many factors why one person may choose to go down one path in comparison to the other person, and it varies from your developmental years in terms of what you witness, what you learn in your environment as well, to your adolescent years as well, which can be extremely informative in how we respond to stressful situations and difficult situations. We all have our own different personalities. We all develop in different ways, and we all have our own unique biological makeup as well. Some people have more social support networks around them compared to other people, and some people naturally have higher stress tolerance and resilience compared to other people as well. So there's no exact answer around this, unfortunately. However, what can determine some of these factors, which I've seen more commonly in mental health as well, is the amount of support you have around you. Often many people develop a strong sense of guilt and shame. They do not disclose what's happening with them to the family or any other person or any other health professional because they're so worried about judgment. And because of that negative sense of judgment, they will not speak out about the difficulties they're experiencing and therefore continue with their own destruction, as you mentioned. But also, I think what's really important to mention as well, like you mentioned with trauma, I think trauma is really important to bring into this circle as well. When an individual has experienced some sort of trauma, it's not necessarily important. It's not necessary that they will develop some sort of toxic substance misuse or some sort of alcohol dependency. That's not always the case. However, there's a small amount of individual, again, to suppress some of those memories, to suppress some of those difficult feelings, they will turn to alcohol or some other sort of substance misuse. However, there is hope, because once they come to therapy, once they are taught the skills how to manage those emotions better and how to manage those stressful situations better, they start managing their emotions independently rather than being dependent on some sort of substance. And therefore, with effective treatment, with effective therapy and good evidence-based therapy, a person can manage this. And I think one really important factor as well is one's self-esteem. I think what's really important, if we have very low self-esteem, intoxication and alcohol dependency can become a form of self-harming. Because I have no self-worth, I will then drink myself to death, basically, because that's a form of self-harming. And therefore, improving an individual's self-esteem can really improve the way they respond to toxic substances as well.
So many good points you raised there, and so many points came to my mind while you were saying about the importance of the social network and the socializing, and again, the importance of jama'ah in Islam and the importance of community relations in Islam. So, Syed, I'm sorry, we are reaching completely the end of the program. Syed, what are your concluding remarks regarding this topic that we have discussed today?
Yes, I mean we should not be apologetic, and this is the time that every Muslim goes through difficult time, especially at work and schools and colleges and families around, especially those who are married into Christian families. They have even more difficult time because they want to celebrate Christmas, and celebrating Christmas cannot be without alcohol, and so the ties and relationship become difficult during this time. So I would say be patient and be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will get far more greater reward, inshallah, in the world hereafter.
Thank you. And Brother Zabair, what is your advice? Because I understand you also use the sayings of the Ahlebait and the Quranic verses in your cognitive behavior therapy programs. So, how do you incorporate those, and what is your final concluding remark regarding today's topic?
Sure. I guess as concluding remarks, I just want to say it's incredibly difficult and it's incredibly challenging for that person who might be suffering in silence. And I completely understand there's substantial guilt and shame. I think we need to improve on many levels. As Muslims, as ourselves, become more accepting and more compassionate, to open the doors so people can admit and approach that they have a problem, and we can then help them and guide them where they can receive the correct support and help, rather than judging other people and being harsh in our judgment. I think our centers, mosques and imam barkas, need to be more welcoming as well. It doesn't matter if you drink, it doesn't matter if you take drugs or alcohol, but if you are willing to do something about it, and if you are willing to work with professionals to help yourself, I think we should be very accommodating to any individual going through any sort of problem or difficulty in their life, regardless of the nature of the problem. And we are not to judge. And I guess coming on to the sayings, there was the saying of Imam Ali alayhi salam, which really came to mind for this show. Imam Ali alayhi salam says beautifully that life consists of 2 days. One day is against you and one day is against you. So do not be proud and reckless for the days that are for you, and do not and be patient, sorry, for the days that are against you. And I think this is really important, because often as human beings we think we are invisible, we can live however we like. We need to remind ourselves that, of course, God is always watching, God is always present, and therefore we should be with observance with God. But I think more importantly, for the sake of your own self and the sake of your family, of course, to be doing something productive and healthy for them, and setting a good example for the next generation as well, of course.
So beautifully put, and thank you so much for your fabulous work that you do with the asylum seekers and with your patients. Thank you so much to both the guests for joining us today. Thank you, dear viewers, for listening.